Sit down a minute, Stepan. I have something else to ask you. You have been invited to read at that literary matinee, haven't you? It was arranged through me. Tell me, what exactly do you intend to read? What do I intend to read? Well, precisely about that Queen of Queens, that ideal of mankind, the Sistine Madonna, who in your opinion is not worth as much as a jar or a pencil. So your subject won't be history? Mrs. Stavrogin said, bitterly disappointed. But they won't even listen to you. Ah, you're really obsessed by your Sistine Madonna. Now tell me, what pleasure will you get from putting all those people to sleep? Please believe me, Stepan, what I'm saying now is for your own good. It would be very different if you picked out some short but amusing medieval anecdote from Spanish history. You know, something that happened at court, or better still, if you selected one incident and filled it out with some ad-lib stories and witticisms. Their court was so magnificent, and they had so many gorgeous ladies and mysterious poisonings. Karmazinov even said it would be difficult not to make something interesting out of Spanish history. Now it's Karmazinov. That fool who has written himself dry, who's looking for a subject for me. Karmazinov has an almost statesman-like insight. I see you become very insolent, Stepan. Your Karmazinov is a spiteful old woman who wrote himself dry long ago. Ah, cher. Since when have you become so enslaved by them? I can't stand him myself because of the airs he puts on, but I must respect his great intelligence. I repeat, I've defended you as well and as vigorously as I could. And really, why should you insist on being boring and ridiculous? Why not come out on the stage with the benign smile suited to a representative of a past epoch and tell them 2 or 3 little anecdotes with your inimitable wit, the way you alone know how to tell them? And although you may be an old man, although you may belong to another age, although you may have lost touch with them, you can acknowledge it yourself with a smile in your introduction, and they'll all see what a nice, kind, witty old wreck you really are. In brief, you'll show them that you're an old-fashioned man, but progressive enough to see all the ugliness of certain ideas you yourself used to profess. Please, as a special favor, do as I ask. That's enough, cher. Don't ask any more of me. I will read them a piece on the Madonna that will raise a storm that will crush either them or me. It will certainly be you who is crushed. Well, I suppose then that such is my fate. I will tell them about that low slave, that perverted, stinking flunky who was the first to climb a ladder with scissors in his hand, to slash the divine image of the human ideal in the name of equality, envy, and digestion. Let my curse thunder forth, and then the lunatic asylum? Possibly, but whatever the outcome, whether I'm defeated or victorious that same night, I'll take my beggar's pack. I'll leave all my belongings behind, all your gifts and allowances and promises of future blessings, and leave on foot to end my life as a tutor in some merchant's family, or die of hunger in a ditch by the road. I have spoken. Alea jacta est. He rose again. I was sure of it, Mrs. Stavrogin cried, her eyes flashing. She also rose to her feet. I've known for years that your only aim in life was to disgrace me and my house with your slander. What do you mean, a tutor at a merchant's, or dying in a ditch? It's all nothing but sheer spite and slander, nothing else. You have always despised me, but I will end like a knight loyal to his lady, because your opinion is what matters to me most of all. From this moment on, I'll accept nothing from you and shall revere you unrewarded. That all sounds rather stupid. You've never respected me. I may have had 1,000 weaknesses. Yes, I ate your food. I'm talking now in the language of the nihilists. But eating has never been the supreme motivation of my acts. It just happened. I'm not very sure how. But I always thought that there was something more important between us than food, and I've never been a vile calculator. So now I'm going to put things straight. I'm setting out late in the season. It's late fall. Mist hangs over the fields. The road is covered with the hoarfrost of old age. and the wind howls to remind me of the grave that is my destination. But I'll set out on my way, full of love so pure and noble, faithful to his sweetest dream. Oh, goodbye, my dreams. 20 years, alea jacta est. His face was sprinkled with tears that had suddenly gushed from his eyes. He picked up his hat. I don't know Latin, Mrs. Stavrogin said, trying to control herself. Who knows, perhaps she too felt like crying, but her indignation and the impulses she was acting under got the better of it. I only know that that's all just a silly game. You will never be able to carry out these threats that fill you with such self-admiration. You'll never go anywhere, nor work for a merchant. You'll end your days on my hands after living quietly on your allowance and receiving your good-for-nothing friends at home on Tuesdays. Goodbye, Stepan. Alea jacta est. The die is cast. He bowed deeply to her and left. He returned home half dead from emotional exhaustion. Chapter 6. Peter Verkovensky gets busy. The date of the gala was fixed, definitely. As it drew nearer, Governor von Lemke grew more sad and retiring. He was full of all sorts of sinister forebodings, which worried his wife very much. Indeed, things weren't going as well as they should have. Lemke's mild and kindly predecessor had handed the province over to him in rather a poor state. There was a threat of a cholera epidemic now. In some places, there was a high incidence of plague. Fires had ravaged towns and villages throughout the summer, and more stupid rumors about arson were circulating. The incidence of robbery and violence had doubled. Still, all this would have been manageable if there hadn't been other things to disturb the governor, who until then had been a happy man. What worried his wife most was that every day he turned quiet and more strangely secretive. What could he possibly want to hide from her? True, he seldom contradicted her and for the most part fully complied with her wishes. On her insistence, he had enforced 2 or 3 measures aimed at the strengthening of gubernatorial powers, which were rather shaky legally. With the same aim in view, a few really serious transgressions had been condoned, and people who should have been sent to prison or to Siberia had been, on her insistence, promoted and rewarded. And then some queries and complaints were systematically ignored. All this came to light later. Lemke signed everything he was asked to sign and never questioned the part his wife played in the performance of his duties. But he was liable to suddenly kick up a row over, quote, mere trifles, end of quote. And this always took his wife by surprise. It was obvious, though, that those moments of rebellion were a compensation for the long days of compliance. Despite all her subtlety and intuition, Mrs. von Lemke couldn't understand this delicate need in her husband's noble character. Besides, she had too many other things on her mind to be bothered trying, and that caused a great deal of misunderstanding. Certain things are none of my concern here, and anyway, I don't feel qualified to discuss them. It is none of my business to comment upon administrative shortcomings, and indeed I will eliminate this whole aspect of the situation from my narrative. When I set out to record these events, I had another objective in mind. Besides, the present investigation in our province, now being conducted by the central government, is sure to bring many facts to light if we will just wait a bit. Some explanations, however, cannot be avoided. But to return to Mrs. von Lemke, the poor lady with whom I greatly sympathize, could have attained everything she wanted so badly, glory and all that, without going to such lengths and without getting involved in violent and eccentric movements, the way she did from the very moment of her arrival. But whether it was the fault of too much romanticism or of the sad and repeated failures of her early years when her luck suddenly changed She felt somehow that she was some sort of chosen creature, almost an anointed one, upon whom, quote, a tongue of flame, end of quote, had descended. And it was precisely in that tongue of flame that all the trouble lay, since it was not, after all, a chignon that sits comfortably on any woman's head. But it would have been quite hopeless to make a woman see that. So anyone who encouraged her illusion was assured of her favor, and people vied with each other in encouraging it. In no time, the poor lady became the target of all sorts of people trying to influence her while fancying herself as a highly original thinker. Many charlatans feathered their nests during her husband's brief tenure by taking advantage of her naivete. And what a tangle she got herself into, all the while deluding herself that she was acting independently. She favored many conflicting interests and ideas. The big landed estates, because of the aristocratic aura she saw in them. The gubernatorial authority, which she strove to strengthen. The new democratic local institution, the new order of the future. Free thinking and all sorts of socialist notions. She was fascinated both by the severe elegance of an aristocratic drawing room and by the coarse vulgarity of the young people around her, who behaved in her house almost as if they were in a local dive. She longed to bring about general happiness, to reconcile the irreconcilable, or to put it more accurately, to unite everyone and everything in the common adoration of her person. She had her favorites, of course. She became very fond of Peter Verkovensky, who used the most unabashed flattery on her. But he also interested her for a very different reason, a very incongruous one that perfectly characterized the poor lady. She hoped that he would reveal to her a conspiracy to overthrow the existing regime. Unlikely as that may sound, it was just as I say. She was somehow convinced that a plot against the government was being hatched in our province just at that time, and Peter, by an alternation of silences and hints, encouraged her in that strange notion. She imagined he was connected with all the revolutionary elements active throughout Russia, but that at the same time he adored her and was totally devoted to her. Uncovering the plot, gratitude from Petersburg, a spectacular career for her to follow, her influence on the young generation through, quote, kindness, end of quote, which would keep them from, quote, going overboard, end of quote. All that managed to coexist somehow in her confused, dreamy head. Why, hadn't she already conquered and saved Peter himself? She was, for some reason, quite certain of that, and she would save the others too. None of them would perish. She would rescue them all. She would handle each case individually, report them, and then explain their motivations, act in the interests of higher justice. Then, perhaps, history and maybe the whole Russian liberal movement would bless her name, and at the same time, the plot would be thwarted. Why, her way had all the advantages. However, the governor had to be made a little more cheerful for the forthcoming gala reception. He had to be distracted and reassured. For this purpose, she sent Peter to have a talk with him, hoping he would know how to relieve her husband's gloom. She may even have hoped that Peter could do this by giving him some tips straight from the horse's mouth. She had implicit trust in Peter's know-how. Peter hadn't been in the governor's office for a long time, and now, He swept in on him at a moment when the patient was in a most delicate state.